clarification. Ms. Egan, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Buban.
Here.
Mr. Coughlin.
Here.
Mr. Fry is excused. Ms. Fitzgibbon.
Here.
Ms. Huppy.
Here.
Mr. Jackson.
Here.
Ms. Patterson.
Here.
Ms. Sword.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
President Sullivan.
Here. Now is the time on the agenda when we invite public comment. If there are any members of the public who wish to address the board, now is the time to do it. We invite you to come to the podium and speak for more or less 3 minutes, although we're not real rigorous. I see no one approaching the microphone. Going. Next on the agenda is the legislative update. Since the legislature is not currently in session, I assume that we have nothing to report.
Nothing, although I'm probably going to send out, and you can find this on the WASB website, but there's sort of a legislative agenda, so we have that as a reference. Not that we have to be perfectly aligned with that, but I think it'd be good information for people to be aware of. So we'll send that out and have for the next meeting.
Thank you. Questions or comments, anyone? Next on the agenda is the district administrator's report. Dr. Onsager.
Thanks. A couple things. So some of you may be aware that for the last couple of years we've been partnering with an organization called Bridging Brighter Smiles. It's an organization that does ongoing preventative oral care. The dentist and the hygienist come actually to our schools. It's open to anybody, primarily targeted to families who may not have the ability to get their son or daughter to a dentist or may not can afford it, but anybody can use it. And they go through their insurance, or if they cannot afford it, through donations, they get the preventative care. And so we will again continue that service. But last year, they saw in our district 95 students. They did 139 screenings and cleanings. They did 195 fluoride applications, and they sealed 159 teeth. So, and it's a great program that they actually come into our schools to provide the dental care. And if there's anything more serious, of course, then they'll hook them up with a dentist to the dentist office. But it's a great program for our families. Next thing I had is, for the last couple of years, we've had an after-school program at an outside company who provides an after-school program at Fox and Sand Hill. We had it for a year at Kaganza, but it being an outside company and their stipulation of so many students or families need to sign up in order for them to run it, in order to sustain it, etc. We haven't been able to have one at Kaganza for the last couple of years. I'm pleased to announce that through a partnership with the city Park and Rec's department, that Kaganza will have an after-school program starting in September. It will be Monday through Friday, where families can either choose a 3 or 5 day option. The rate will be comparable, if not somewhat lower at times, depending on the student and their financial situations, than our current company that we're working with at Fox and Sand Hill. They're working with community organizations to offer scholarships to families who cannot afford it. And they're still in the works of finalizing everything, but I have to give Aaron Conrad and Courtney Barnes, who's the new Park and Rec coordinator for the city, great kudos for working on this and getting this to the point where it looks like this will be a reality come September, which is great news for our students and our families for some after-school care at Kaganza. Couple other things that I have. The Stoughton Wellness Coalition has a display called In Plain Sight. And what this is, and they had it at our athletic meeting, our athletic code meeting for our athletes. And what it is, it's a full bedroom. And in that bedroom are 48 drug and alcohol items that are hidden in plain sight. So it's a teenager's bedroom. And so you walk in there and it's 48 different items that are actually in plain sight to help educate our families of things that are in plain sight. We'll have this display at River Bluffs Open House. We'll have it at the high school's back to school night. We're trying to, there's been some talk about seeing if we could get it during registrations, but it'll be out there. Stoughton Wellness Coalition, in conjunction with the police department, went out and researched what these are. And so if anybody, the community members, have a chance to see this when it comes around, it's eye-opening.
Do they provide a shovel? Because that's the only way I got into my teenage years.
Right. And a hazmat suit.
Yeah, that would be good.
So if, we were hoping that it was going to be set up tonight at River Bluff, but we couldn't get it to get scheduled and set up, because again, it's a full bedroom that they have to, for you to take a look at it, but they will have it set up in various locations. So if our community members, or especially you as a school board, want to see it, it'll be available. Next thing is, today, our elementary staff, in the morning it was K2, in the afternoon it was 3-5, spent the day doing an in-service on Lucy Calkins' unit of study and reading. We're really excited about this, and staff were really pumped and excited to see the different units of study and reading and how we can have a coherent curriculum, especially K5 in reading and the units of study based on the standards, etc. So staff were in today, the elementary staff were in today in 2 different shifts, looking at these units of studies and working through mini lessons and working through, we know that the more students read, the better it is. And so we want students engaged in reading, and then in small groups discussing what they're reading, etc. So our staff were doing some in-service on that today as well. We continue to look for partnerships that we can create with the district. If you remember last year, I announced the partnerships with Level Up, giving our staff members a health club membership to Level Up. We talked about Lake Mills Dry Cleaning offering the service here, Conan Automotive offering services. I'm also pleased to announce that we have just finalized, and we'll continue to talk on the logistic details, but Kicks Unlimited will be a partner as well, which will offer 33% off to our staff if they want to use their services and enroll in the classes that they have. So it'd be 33% off for staff member, and then off the regular price. The first family member gets 25% off the regular price. Second family member gets 25% off the regular price. Third family member on is free. And so, again, it's something, if our staff are interested in taking advantage of, it's fully up to them, but it's another opportunity and another example of us partnering with local businesses to work on adding some benefits to our staff. And then a couple dates for you to remember. Seems hard to believe, it's August, and the first home football game is August 17th. Before school starts. And so that is a week from Friday is the first home football game against Portage. Board members are welcome if you want to help out and hand out programs. Mel has all the workers lined up, because sometimes it's hard for board members to get away, but if you want to help hand out programs and be there to greet community as they come through, it's a great opportunity. So that's August 17th, game starts at 7 o'clock. We play Portage. It's the first home football game. It's also youth night of the season. And then,
And the new band uniforms?
I don't know if they will be unveiled at that, because usually the first one, they're usually in like a
Oh, yeah,
t-shirt,
yeah.
because it's too hot for the band uniforms, but within the next couple games, they'll be unveiled. And then we have central registration, August 16th and the 22nd, at the high school. So those are a few dates and a few items that are going on this summer.
Any questions or comments? Was this I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I love the first football game.
Yes.
I really like the vibe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this the first year that we've done the remote registration?
Yes, it's the first year that we've had some of our registration, our online access. We're still asking families to come to registration for pictures, to get their schedules, et cetera. But the more we can streamline it online, they can pay online, they can do a lot of the things to help them reduce the time spent in registration and to help us be more efficient in getting families in and out.
Do we have data yet on how successful the online registration was?
Not that I've seen yet, but that's something we can look at as far as pulling out percentages and things like that. Again, it was the first, our first go-around of it, and people are getting used to it, which is, I think it's great.
Just wanted to say that is also in Spanish and the other language. So we have also Spanish and no, the registration. English, Spanish,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Right.
So and I actually did mine in Spanish and
Right.
it's perfectly written.
Good.
The only thing with the of course the policies and all that are
Right.
just in English, so people will
Yeah.
be able to see it. But that's great.
Good.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing that.
Anything else? Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda
Albania.
is the consent agenda.
So, I move approval of the July 18, 2018 regular board meeting minutes. I move approval of the July 12, August 18, 2018 check register as presented. We would like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donation to the district. $10,000 from Stoughton Sport Boosters Incorporated for wrestling mats. $4,000 from Stoughton Sport Booster for scholarships. $1,536 from Stoughton Area Youth Soccer for soccer balls. $1,250 from Cummins Business Services for girls for Guitar Sat Lab program. And related cash donation budget adjustment for $16,786. I also move approval of permanent professional educator contract for Sarah McFarland, Jeff Rickett, Rebecca Schwartz, sorry for the pronunciation, Michael Stryker, and Brianna Sweeney for the 2018-19 school year. And I move to approve the resignation of Abby Alt at the end of the 17-18 school year, pending liquidated damages of $600, and the resignation of Jamie Martin, effective immediately for the 2018-19 school year.
The consent agenda has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Steve. Is there any discussion?
I have a question. What does it mean, pending liquidated damages?
So the two staff members that you have that are resigning are current staff. By our handbook and by their contract says if they resign after July 1st, there's liquidated damages to pay to the district for breaking their contract. The second one, why there's no liquidated damages for the second person, is that was a teacher who we hired. The board approved her contract, but she has since resigned before even coming here, she's got a job in the Fox Valleys. So she's decided to go to the Fox Valleys instead of the Madison area.
Okay.
And so she's never even started. So that is a conversation, I think we may want to consider in the future, because districts are seeing more and more of that second instance where we try to get out early and hire our staff members. We're seeing more and more, especially our younger teachers, who will accept the very first job that's offered to them and then continue to shop around. And so they bounce and accept 2, maybe 3 jobs in the summer. They just keep kind of playing against each other. So that may be something that we might want to talk about, is are there liquidated damages associated with that? Because like our current staff, we are now have a month to find that teacher so that they're in the classroom right from the start. And when we make our staffing and where we think everybody's hired and we've moved on and we're going on other things, we scrambled in this last month. So that's maybe future conversations to have.
How often has this happened?
It's happening more and more these last couple of years, and like I said, we're not the only district that is seeing it. I've talked to my counterparts in McFarland, in Oregon, in Edgerton, in Monona Grove. They're all seeing the same thing, where they'll hire people in the spring, and then this time of year they keep, and some of them even are applying to multiple jobs and will say, on their WeCan application, which is all online, I've accepted a job in Appleton, but are still applying to things around here. So sometimes you can see that, knowing that they're shopping around to get to the area they want or to get to a district they want, etc. But we're seeing more and more of that, as part of it, as we see more and more of a teacher shortage. There are at least 50% less people going into education now than there was in 2010.
Are there other districts, the McFarland and Oregon type districts, are they requiring the damages?
Not yet, but that's a conversation they're starting to have as well. And so that's something, as a Dane County Superintendent's group, we're having a conversation. Is that something that, as Dane County, we want to do?
Should we probably have a conversation with the School of Education and some other, even MATC and all that, and try to see how that could be, how can we promote people into going into education, and then if they have a job, like the same thing that happened with the health.
I know the colleges are worried about it. I know the colleges are looking at different ways that they can do it. But I also know some of the colleges are getting rid of some of their majors or some of their education programs. Whitewater used to graduate the largest amount of teachers in the state. Now Whitewater, their graduation is down, I think, 30%, but Madison is down 50% from the last decade. Some of the other ones like Stout and River Falls and Stevens Point, you've seen them not offer certain majors. So whoever's in their program now, they've made the commitment to make sure they graduate with that major and that license, but they're not accepting new freshmen into it. So that's something that the university system is having those conversations as well.
I'm sure it's a nationwide issue, because, I mean, having several adult children in that age group, they do that.
Right.
That it's like that whole, well, if something better comes along, why wouldn't you grab it?
And then Wisconsin used to have the highest standards for licensure in the nation. And so it used to be, if you could get a Wisconsin teaching license, pretty much every other state would automatically accept your teaching license. Well, now, with the latest change in the legislature, I think it was last year, Wisconsin is now required to, if you are licensed in any other state, the DPI is required to give you a teaching license in Wisconsin. So you can no longer say that we have the highest standards in the nation as far as what we require for licensure of our teachers, which to me is a sad commentary of where we're going.
Anything else? We have the consent agenda moved and seconded. We will now call the question. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved. We will now move to the issue of committee reports. John, we have your proposal on the joint district and city ad hoc committee mission statement later on. So I suggest that we put off discussion of your committee report until then. Steve, facilities is not met.
No, but we were trying to figure out some dates in September, but now
Well,
that Cal's going to be leaving.
Right, so I think we have, what's the,
There was a date for October.
for October that we can, that the facilities group can come in, which is this regular scheduled
Okay.
facilities committee, but our facility study group to talk about classrooms of the future, I think the
Yeah.
topic is,
Yes.
which we're going to invite every board member to attend that as well.
Okay.
When does our facility study wrap up?
They are in draft form, so they're putting some finishing touches, kind of going through their drafts. We're looking that it will be in, I think, November on presented to the board
Okay.
for it, but they're currently in their draft. They're drafting the documents as we speak.
Mhm.
So they've collected all the data. I believe they're now just kind of compiling it.
Finance is not met.
We have not met.
Joe is not here. Are there any other committee reports?
Policy will.
Policy, yeah, so let's roll that into the discussion of the Neola proposal. So if we could move to that agenda item.
So, in your packet is a PowerPoint from Dr. Scott Brown. He presented to the policy committee. Dr. Brown is the former superintendent of McFarland, along with a Neola brochure and some examples of their updates and special updates. Neola, it used to be out of, was it Iowa? Is that where he said?
Ohio?
Ohio. It was an organization out of Ohio that was kind of like our CSIS. And then a gentleman bought the policy part from that CISA, but they still called it Neola, because that was the name everybody was used to. And in essence, what it is it's a policy service. So right now, the board has numerous policies, and we're actually better than some districts. Some districts have twice as many policies as we do. In some districts, their policies are a lot wordier, et cetera. So we've done a pretty good job of looking at our policies, trying to condense them, trying to make them readable. But as state statutes change, as the law changes, as everything changes, it's a constant upkeep of your policies. It's a constant rewriting of your policies. It's a constant of looking at them, getting our legal advice from our attorneys as far as what should be in it, what shouldn't be in it, what certain policies we should have. What Neola does is, Neola is a service, and they're with several districts, and I think there's a list in the information you have of districts they're in. Neola has a template, and they look at the different policies that are required, let's say in Wisconsin, what else they think they should have. They have their attorneys that are also reviewing policies, looking at it, and they have a template design. And so if we would go with the Neola service, the policy committee would pretty much spend this next year looking at all the policies that Neola says this is what we should have. comparing what Neola has to what we currently have, and there's some decision points of what do we want to add to the policies, what don't we want to add to the policies, and getting everything uniformed and everything standardized. It's then in board docs, which we have our policies now, but it's searchable in board docs, et cetera. And then Neola comes out with 2 regular updates a year, every 6 months, and here's recommendations for policy changes. And what happens a lot of times, because we cross-reference policies, you change one policy and you have to change 6 others because it's cross-referenced. So they do that cross-reference, which means it should be changing this one, it should be changing that one. Any special updates, if you remember, we've been talking numerous times about the, I'm drawing a blank of the name, the college options. And we wrote a policy knowing that the law, we had to have something in place, knowing that they're still working on it, knowing Neola would be current, up to date, and just sending us the updates that the policy committee can look to what do they need to adopt, should they adopt it, etc. Any of those special updates. And so that's the service that the policy committee is recommending that the board goes with. Just for the policy turnover, where it would look at all of our policies and compare them to Neola and do this next year of this crosswalk and adopting the new policies. That is what that $15,000 is, kind of the working with their staff to transfer that over. After that, it's roughly $3,100 a year for that service, which is the updates, which is any of the other work. Depending on the year, we spend more than that on our attorney's fees, looking at policy, reviewing our policies, etc. That doesn't mean that we can't still use our own policy or our own legal opinions if we go with Neola. It doesn't mean that we can't add a policy that maybe Neola doesn't have or would deviate from it. It's just, here's a framework, here's their legal advice, etc. The other cost in there is, there's another service of, I believe it's $24,000. If we wanted to subscribe to not only the policy, but the administrative guidelines. Currently, if you look at our policies and you look at some of our policies, you'll see our policy, which is a short statement, and then linked to it is administrative guidelines, which is kind of our operating process and procedures. And one of the reasons it's done that way is the state may come by and change 1 or 2 words. That really doesn't affect our policy, but it affects maybe our administrative guidelines, or it affects, and so it's a lot easier to change just that 1 word in the administrative guidelines than going through the entire policy review, etc. It's also the administrative operating process and procedures that are administrative guidelines. At some point, we may want to do, if we go with Neola for our policies, I would probably recommend we go with Neola for our administrative guidelines to take that comprehensive look at as well. But that's not something we would have to sign on to right away. You could separate that, or you could combine it. The only advantage of combining it is the price may go up by the time we're ready for administrative guidelines. But realistically, we wouldn't be ready to look at administrative guidelines as a capacity standpoint until year 2. So you could, if the board decides to go with that service, that's also a decision point for the board. Policy committee members, am I missing something?
No, I mean, I've talked about this. I thought I'm a strong supporter of this. I think, having served in the policy committee for just over a year now, respectfully, a lot of great work was done on that, but I felt like we were constantly in reactive mode, spending so much time instead of really being more proactive with our policies, and I think that this is going to help remedy that quite a bit. I think the investment is worth it, not just from lawyer fees, but I think time that administrators, especially our central administrators, have to spend crafting policies or updating policies or updating us on policies. And so I think it'd be a good move for us to go this route. I think we may have to Long-term, it might change a little bit the charge or the mission or whatever of the policy committee, but I think it could be done in a good way. Maybe more of a committee that's an incubator of ideas and how we make those happen from a policy standpoint. So I've looked at this quite a bit too, and from my experience on the policy committee, I think this is, from my stance, this is the right direction to go.
Jolie, you had your hand up.
No, I'm fine.
Steve?
So is Neola, is their focus mainly to ensure that we're managing our risk from a compliance perspective, and less so around up-and-coming policy, kind of forward-thinking policy? It's more around managing risk and compliance?
I would say a big portion of theirs is making sure that we have the policies in place. Like you said, the risk management, conversations of that.
It seems to be a big selling point
Right.
in their documentation.
Right.
So I just want,
But that doesn't prevent us, and they fully talk about some districts going through and writing these policies, and so Dr. Brown would be working with us. And then several times a year, they bring in all their consultants, and they talk about, are there policies that districts are adding that may not be part of this that maybe they should add? And they have those conversations. So there are times and numerous times where some districts are writing policies that now get added to the whole bunch of things because it's something, like you said, it may be forward thinking, it may be, but nothing prevents us from doing those proactive policies. Making sure we have our standard base of policies that we have to have for risk management, and as Tim said, right now that's our focus.
yeah. So kind of a follow-up, I've always struggled with, we have 107 policies, so I've struggled with our ability to understand what is expected of who, whether it's administration, whether it's the board, who is responsible for what and when. And so I'm wondering, will this help us to have a better feel for responsibilities and expectations and accountability?
I think it will give us a clearer picture of what our actual policies are, because we will look at every single policy we have. The board if we would go this route, the board over this next year would be looking at every policy because you're gonna have to approve every policy.
Okay.
So one of the things that we've been looking at, thinking about, you just got the books tonight, Steve, is the coherent governance or policy-based governance model. And that model, as I understand it, draws a distinction between board policies and district policies. That isn't really a distinction that's made clear in our current set of policies.
Yeah.
So in that model, as I understand it, my understanding is very imperfect, most of the policies that we have in our current policy manual or policy list are district policies. They're policies that govern the operation of the district. When do we have to pay for college costs, for example? What do we do about drug education? Just all the stuff that's in there. The board policies under the coherent governance model outline how the board operates, the relationship of the board and the superintendent, and the overall operational expectations of so that policy in that model really means two different things. One is how the district operates, and the other is how we as a board govern the district and set expectations.
Okay. And we're currently don't have any services. So
But
we
we've
would
used
be adding
right.
a consulting.
So we've used
services.
WASB in the past, and I think it's been 5 years now, 4 or 5 years, where we had them take a comprehensive look at our policies, and that's something we could certainly do as well. But what they give you is they give you a document of saying, we believe these policies need to be changed, we believe these policies you need to add, etc. But that is a snapshot in time. That is as of, let's say we do it now, it's as of August. And so everything that changes after August, it's not included in that update. Whereas Neola is a little pricier, you're paying for the yearly service, but they look at what is changing and what districts need to incorporate or think about incorporating into policies to make sure that we've got the legal statutes covered.
Sure.
During that meeting, those of you there may recall that I had a lot of direct questions for Dr. Brown. I was kind of playing it off between, I had spoken extensively with a couple of the lawyers from WASB that were at the conference Yoli and I went to. And definitely Neola trumped what WASB could offer. And I think that the flexibility built in, that if we as Stoughton Area School District have a policy we want just exclusive to us, there's nothing preventing that. But we have this service that is always looking at changes in law, and that could go on all the time. And while we get a legislative update from WASB, it'd be really nice to know that somebody is bringing it to our attention, and I think it just lends a layer of protection to make sure we're on top of all that.
Usually, especially at the biennium budget time, so every 2 years there's a lot of education policy put into the budget and so this coming spring, I anticipate there'll be a lot more policy changes because we seem to write education policy into the budget, and where the money flows, that flows the language. And so I anticipate, and not to say that we can't, because that's what we've been doing every year. We take that and we look at what policies need to be changed, et cetera. Sometimes there are timelines in there that we have to go. If we're with Neola would do that, and they would be sending us, here's your update, here's our recommendations, here's our decision points, type of thing.
Allison? I'm sorry.
What do we pay right now for WASB to do this?
Right now, we have a membership to WASB. Every school district in Wisconsin is a member of WASB. So we have a membership fee, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. And in that membership fee, we can get some example policies from other districts. If we want them to take a comprehensive look at our policies as a snapshot in time, it's about
$300, something like that?
It's
More.
I thought it was about $3,000, but I could be wrong.
Some
Yeah.
thousand.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
$3,000
Yeah.
for them to do that snapshot in time.
And that would be in addition
To our membership fees. We also find at times where we'll call WASB because the law says we have to have something in place by such and such a time, and WASB will say we have no examples of that because no districts have formalized this policy yet, and so you're then scrambling, and then somebody else adopts it, or they'll send out, after you adopt it, here's what we recommend, and we're kind of playing catch up. So sometimes their service isn't the most up-to-date on some of the policies that we need. In which case, a lot of times, we end up going through our own attorneys to help draft the policies, which is great. I love attorneys, but the more you get attorneys, into the conversation, the less I understand. And I think there's a lot of jargon in education, but sometimes, how do we make it say what we want it to say?
That was very diplomatically put.
Thank you.
You're saying that we charge hundreds of dollars an hour for gibberish?
Not my words.
No, not mine either.
just one more part to that then, are there other services that do this besides Neola? Have we looked at
Right.
other options?
WASB can do some of it, but there's nothing as comprehensive as Neola.
Okay.
Jill?
I just want to clarify. So Neola is sort of like cornered the market on this policy writing thing, kind of
Yep.
like Epic and medical records.
Right.
So we decided we wanted a policy about random things. We could just contact them and say, hey, who's written a policy about that? What does their policy look like?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Kathleen?
I've kind of lost my train of thought, to be honest, but specific to Neola, I had never heard of it or even knew that existed as a service, again, until this conference that Yoli and I went to, and just happened to be sitting by somebody that we were discussing policy, and he was like, you guys don't use Neola? And he whips out this paperwork and is showing us, you know, it's great, we get these updates, and oh, it saved us. So that was an endorsement from one district that was present, and I'm all about reviews, you know? I didn't look at Google reviews for this, but
Are they on Yelp? Yeah.
So, can I ask a follow-up on, I read the license agreement, and I don't know if that was written specifically for us. I assume it was, because it was signed.
There's some, I mean, there's some boilerplate, I think there's a lot of boilerplate in here with some of this stuff.
But I was curious if, with 107 policies that we have in place, if the estimated cost and the time identified in the license agreement would be sufficient. So do you think, do we have a level of confidence that that pricing and schedule and steps that are identified in the license agreement would be adequate for us?
I think so, and I think part of it is if it takes a little longer with some of it, we're not paying travel fees. Dr. Brown lives in McFarland. So whereas some districts, he's traveling, he's staying overnight, he's et cetera, we're a day trip.
Okay, so we may incur additional costs, but it would be less.
Correct.
because of travel fees, okay.
Correct.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Anybody else? So this item is on the discussion agenda for tonight, and it will be placed on the discussion action item agenda for our next meeting. Next on the agenda is a presentation on the discipline process and procedures by Mr. Cruz and Ms. Gates.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
You're rolling that? All right. Yep. Welcome, everybody. Just about ready to get cranking on a new school year, which is fantastic. It's exciting, and registration is just around the corner, so we're getting ready to go. So hopefully we can go through some processes and procedures with you just in generalities and answer any questions you have as we walk through that, okay? First, we wanted to start by saying, always when you start talking about discipline and those kind of things, it kind of whips up different things in people's minds and everything like that, but always from our lens, it's proactive and positive, and always looking through the lens of consistency, fairness, equity, and safety is the way we kind of tackle that. So we kind of put this off into different headers. You can roll that thing if you want. The first one we want to talk about is just what we do for PBIS at both our levels. Just a real brief kind of over snapshot of those kind of things. Do you want to go first, Trish, and then I can roll through? We'll just kind of, we did put some supplementary materials in with that attached to it. Was the PBIS matrix. You guys saw those things. And for high school, middle school, and then the T-chart for office kind of referral kind of things handled in the office and what's handled at the classroom level. Okay, so Trish, you can talk about the matrix.
Well, thank you for letting us come and talk tonight. I know sometimes in education we throw out these letters, so you may or may not be familiar with PBIS as Positive Behavior Interventions and Support. Sometimes it's just shortened as PBS. And as Mike said, it's a way of sharing how we do school, what we value, and how we support each other to make sure that we have a safe and respectful school. It is positive, proactive, and really the whole foundation is around teaching into behaviors, both in common areas and in classrooms, so that all students and all staff really know what's expected in all of those areas. So again, what Mike brought forward is you would have the River Bluff common agreements through our PBIS program about what happens in each of those different areas. And I know Mike will be highlighting his as well.
Yeah, we'll go. As you can see on ours, Trish uses underneath hers respectful of all, engaged in safety, willingness to accept responsibility. Under our three themes are ready, responsible, and respectful underneath ours. And we mention it every day in our announcements and walk that path every day at the high school. So those are those kind of things. That's just a quick overview of PBIS. We go over those with our incoming freshmen and fifth graders when they come in on Web Crew and Link Crew as well, and we'll get into that in just a little bit as well. Expectations. I'll roll that up. Yep. Oops. See, that's why you should
There you go.
That's
I'll
right.
do it.
All right. Expectation-wise, along with PBIS, it kind of just states how we go about business at the high school, how we go about business at the middle school. Coming up for registration, online will be our handbooks this year, so all students will get that as they register, information to where the handbooks are. They used to give them hard copy. You guys are all online now. Ours will be online as well, and they'll have to basically initial off that they know where it's at, they know where to look for it, parents know where it's at, know where to look for it as they go through the registration process. So that will be uploaded and ready to go, and you guys can look at it as well coming into the registration process, if not already uploaded yet. I just don't know where Jen McKinnon's at with that yet.
Can I just jump
Yep,
in?
go.
All right, so one of the things that you see on this slide is, to the right there, is a picture of our web orientation. And one of the things that we are really intentional about at River Bluff with Back to School is we recognize we have students from 3 buildings, even more than that, that come into River Bluff. And so we need to spend some time as we get back to school really sharing how to do River Bluff, how does this work? You may have done cafeteria at Sandhill in this way, or hallway expectations at Kegonsa that way. And so we spend this time to really get together and talk with kids and help them understand really how does River Bluff run and how can we support them in that. We do that a lot through web, and as Mike referenced too, not only through things like announcements, but we also do this with our PBIS Back to School kickoff, which we'll talk about a little bit further in the presentation.
Yeah, as Trish mentions, we do the same thing she does with web. We do with Link Crew, with all the freshmen coming in, go through the processes and procedures with them as well. And we also have our Link Crew leaders, our upperclassmen, go into our academic homerooms with the freshmen and go through the process, and we just pick off different things as we go through the weeks and deliver those lessons inside the homeroom as well as we go through that. So that's how we go. Yep, thanks. Also, to go along with the expectations, sorry if you can roll that back, you might have witnessed in there the T-charts for office managed and classroom managed behaviors as well. So it just gives what will be kind of handled through the lens of a teacher and what will be handled through the lens of the office if it reaches that point or anything like that. So I just want to bring that to your reference as just some supplementary materials we included with that as well. And yeah, like I said, we'll go through homerooms and deliver that with our Link Crew leaders as we go through that process, giving everybody the expectations as we go through there as well. Yep, go. Yep.
Okay. So one of the things that you see here is really how we help. Not only is PBIS a system of working with kids and staff, making sure that we have consistency of expectations, but it also has its foundations in data. And so what you see here, and I know I've seen the ones at the high school as well, our staff look at our behavioral data as we go across the school year, and sometimes we have things that may show up a little bit that we need to really reteach, retrain our students in. So this is just an example of, from last year in March, There were some things in 6th grade that the staff felt they really just wanted to make sure that they retaught and retrained students in order for them to be successful. So I know we do that at River Bluff throughout the year by looking at behavioral data, and the high school
Yep.
does that, I know, as well.
Yeah, we run a building consultation team, and we meet weekly with counselors, psychs, APs, and go over information regarding students that need extra help and those kind of things. And at that point in time, we will involve parents throughout the process and whatever we need to do. We conduct mediations with kids, different groups of kids if need be. Parent meetings, like I said, we do check-in, check-out with kids. We make sure we're touching base with some kids at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, to make sure they're doing well. We set kids up with counseling throughout the year. You know, we use a team approach to address those student behaviors in a proactive way, the best that we can, to give them the guidance that we need to, you know, maybe choose some different behavior, different choices that they're making, those kind of things. We also use the SRO in that capacity as well, as a proactive person to help us before we end up in a situation that is law in nature.
What's the SRO, Mike?
School resource officer, Officer DeVici. We use him to sit down and consult with students and with our counselors and parents if we're having problems or anything like that, in a proactive mannerism to help with that as well. So that's kind of how we use it.
Yep.
I know you guys use it the same way. And he comes in and gives presentations to classes and those kind of things as well. All right. Next one, I also included in your packets a little information on behavior plans and information on voluntary student agreements. At some point in time, we may reach a point when students make a poor choice. We got to gear that back into the direction we need to gear that back into. And it may end up in there's some suspension, or there's detention, or sometimes it ends up in more severe kind of things. And what we've chosen to do here, and it's been very, very successful for us for the last 10 years since I've been here, and I'll point out to you some information that DPI has that we're a recommendation school district on that, for things that are in lieu of expulsions and those kind of things. When it gets to a point in which, you know, maybe sometimes a student needs space away from something else, or space away from school, maybe a suspension, but if it gets beyond that point, then it becomes something to a behavior plan in which there's some rules and some regulations which we're going to put in and some guiding points, and that we can follow through and they can follow through to make better choices. And that you can see, I gave you an example of a behavior plan and some stipulations that might be on there for a variety of different things that a student may choose, you know, behavior that we need to correct and hopefully have some better choices in the future. And then the next, beyond that, is a voluntary student agreement, which is basically an in lieu of expulsion contract, in which we go over with students to walk through the process, to give them one more chance, to put them on probation one more time, to give them one more opportunity to make some better choices. There are some guiding things in there to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. It's been very successful for us here. The state in 2009, and still to this day on their website, underneath alternative expulsion and case studies in Wisconsin for school districts in Wisconsin, DPI, I reckon we're one of the 6 pilot school districts for that, not pilot, I guess, school districts they refer to in the state. So it's worked well for us, and we've been successful.
And maybe I would just
Yep.
jump in and add that River Bluff uses the same 2 processes as the high school, and Mike and I are often in communication, making sure that we are linked 6-12. When we get to these points, we talk quite a bit, but also recognizing that we know that there is a developmental process to children. So what may look like something happening in 6th grade is a little bit different, depending on if
Very
that
appropriate.
student is older,
Yeah.
high school senior.
Very appropriate. Yeah, and, sorry, thank you. Keep moving the pile over. Last one. The next thing is the next steps and what we see for the district around behavior and discipline and attendance. We see a 3-pronged approach as a district. With involvement of the deans of students at the elementary level, gives us a consistent K-12 approach to attendance and behavior at grade appropriate levels, and also a PBIS, and making sure that the different schools are mixing and matching well, and there's good transitions in from 5th into 6th into 9th grade as well. And then that's one prong that we would like to use and focus on. The other one would be, and I digress, the first thing, we'll have monthly meetings with the APs and deans at the high school associate principals, and upcoming new middle school associate principal, and the deans will meet monthly and go over these things with directions from Trish and I as well. The next prong would be to continue to use outside organizations like the Bridges program that we're using now. We use a variety of counseling programs inside Stoughton and outside of Stoughton, and county services that come in and help with kids and stuff, just to keep those partnerships open and use those the best way we can as a team approach for those kids. And the last thing, which has been great for us this year, for our professional growth plan across the district, we're going to focus on as a district for our PPGs, for teaching staff, PD through and we're going to focus it on compassionate schools, compassionate schools and trauma care for PD for all of our staff as we walk through the PPG for all staff, teaching staff. So those are the 3 prongs we're going to tackle around behavior and discipline and attendance. Yeah. Any questions?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank you all very much for this presentation. We had a board retreat earlier this year and went among the board members and said, what do we need to learn about? And this was something that we identified as a priority for us to get a better understanding on. So I'm very grateful for Tim, for you working with these two to put this together and for you all to do it. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely.
Are there questions? Allison.
I have had conversations with people, and particularly it's somebody who's, I would say it's an education professional at a different district, so not here, who routinely expresses frustration with PBIS because feels there's so much emphasis on the positive that there's no consequences for poor behavior. In my personal experience with my own kids, I've not found that to be the case, but I'm just wondering if you have heard that criticism before and how you think maybe we might be different than what she's talking about. I know that's kind of a wide open question, but
You can tackle that.
I'll tackle it from my grade
I'll
level.
add
From
on to-
age appropriate wise, PBIS at the high school, from where I stand, is all about understanding the expectations. I would gladly discuss with whoever you're talking to the accountability of what we hold at the high school at a very high level. And I would hope that our students would say that we've asked them, coached them, expressed to them choices we would like them to make and hold them accountable for what they don't. And I would hope that they would say that in a fair and consistent manner that is across the board. So,
And maybe,
go ahead,
sorry, I would jump in and say PBIS or PBS it's a framework for really beginning to outline, again, as you saw, what are the values at River Bluff in terms of behavior? What does appropriate behavior look like in a cafeteria? What does that look like in a hallway? What does that look like in a classroom? So I think you could probably say that in one sense, is that it's not designed as a consequence model. However, I think both Mike and I recognize and do use at times all of the different tools that we have. We always want to try using that positive, proactive approach. I've never met a parent that doesn't want their child to be successful, but there are times when, for a variety of different reasons, we may use some more traditional consequences. Again, I think from the district point of view, for Mike and I, that is not where we want to lead off, but certainly there are times when that is appropriate. I think if you look at also referencing the T-chart, there is kind of classroom managed, and then if you look at that, there's office managed, and there are some times where we really need maybe to remove a student from school, to kind of stop the world. Something isn't right, and we need to spend the time to investigate that. It's usually a time then that we bring in other professionals, as Mike was sharing, to really dig in and hopefully not have that situation repeated.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Allison?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I guess just only a comment. I mean, it seems to make the most sense to make sure that we've done everything we can to explain, you know, this is the system that's going to work for everybody. And I certainly agree with that. And I mean, it's hard for us to have a student not be able to succeed if we have not outlined what the expectation is. So that does make sense.
Jolie?
I also keep hearing, mostly from parents, still the same thing about the devices, the phones. And then I see, so we use the PBIS for many different things. How are we using it for the phones?
Sure.
And especially, I think it's more of consistency in each classroom, because I always also hear, well, it is off and away, but I heard too that sometimes it's not away, it's still in the classroom, and that causes some problems, thinking, well, I can use it in this classroom, but not in the other classroom, and so that consistency in that, the discipline, right, specifically for that.
So maybe, Yoli, I should talk about that, because I think that's an excellent example, right? You know, through our conversations with staff, conversations that I had last year with our parent group, conversations I had last year with students, and some student surveys, we recognized that one of the behaviors that wasn't going very well was off and away. And that really coincided with the addition of last year of our Chromebooks. So this would be an example of where PBIS is really functional, because it's not only about teaching the students what's the expected behavior, but also making sure within staff that staff are consistent with that. So one of the things that you'll be seeing or maybe hearing about, I'm going to deal with my own 8th grade student when we bring this forward with our PBIS kickoff, is that we at River Bluff have made a decision to move to what's called Away for the Day. Recognizing, you know, all of those concerns that you brought forward, and again, it was expressed by students, by administration, by parents, and staff. So we are hunkering down on that one, and so it's going to be called Away for the Day. Basically, cell phones will not be permitted between bell to bell. However, you know, the little caveat that if there is something that is really unique that a Chromebook cannot do, that would be a teacher having that opportunity to do that. So for example, Rachel Braun was talking about, you know, you can use your smartphone as a heart rate monitor. Okay, you can't do that on a Chromebook. But again, we know, and there's more and more research about the fact that multitasking doesn't exist. And so we want to make sure that we're always, that's a great example, always digging in and saying what isn't working, how do we bring everybody collaboratively together and communicate that out so that we are successful in really having that safe and orderly environment.
At the high school, it's teacher driven. If they need something for a project, it's probably less so now. Now we have Chromebooks and one-to-one. And a lot of schools across, Portage has done it last year, doing exactly what Trish has done, and just said there's just no cell phones in the classroom anymore. We want to make sure that we can access on the Chromebooks and make sure we can do what we need to do before we make that statement and move forward. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you may hear something from your middle school student.
Or you may hear nothing at all.
Just,
Yeah.
my son is going to be highly disappointed, but as his mom and as administrator, I'm very happy with that.
Steve?
Mike and Trish, thanks very much for the info. These are maybe a little nitpicky, but when I was looking at the River Bluff matrix and the high school matrix, in River Bluff they talk about the bathrooms and responsibilities in the restrooms. The high school matrix does not. And I don't know, there's been discussion around locker room, the River Bluff locker room discussion and phones, and should we have something in the high school matrix along those lines too?
Phones and stuff? No.
Yeah.
It's signage on going into every locker room.
So we don't need it in the matrix? Don't
We
think.
haven't had to.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, it's signed up on everything.
The other thing, I noticed we use parent, sometimes we use guardian, and I've noticed, I guess in the statute, especially in the statute where on the voluntary agreement, the statute references parent or guardian, so maybe we could just
Probably should
be
both.
consistent. And then the last thing, I think the last thing, in the voluntary agreement, well, no, there's two things I had. On the voluntary agreement, there's no real time frames, like when we say we're going to do something, or when a student or parent or guardian is expected to do something. It wasn't clear to me that.
I took all the times out. That's just
Oh.
a blank.
Oh,
Yeah, I took the names out and the blank and the
but the
times out.
time frame, like within a certain number of days, do we have?
5 days.
Oh, okay.
5 days.
Okay.
Yeah, I can walk into the nuts and bolts of all
No,
that
that's
stuff.
okay.
But it needs to be done within the first 5 days, and after
Okay.
5 days, then it becomes an expulsion kind of an issue, which probably different paperwork has to be sent out.
Okay.
State statute, yeah.
And Trish, maybe this is more to you, because I noticed that the Infinite Campus is no longer going to be used for minor behavioral. And I know we've seen data at various times around incident reporting and things like that. So will we have a different set of data? Will things look differently? Will it, as far as incident data? Because we won't be using Infinite Campus anymore for minor things?
That is, Stephen, it's a great question, and that's something at the administrative retreat that we had in July. That was a topic of conversation, and Liz Rohde, who's one of the assistants at the high school, is convening high school assistant principals, middle school assistant principals, and the dean, so that we are consistent across it, so that we can track that.
Okay.
We can use Infinite Campus, we can use EduClimber, we can use, what we discovered is everybody was using slightly different. So my analogy was it's hard to compare when we're comparing apples and bananas.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that those monthly meetings that Mike talked about, is they're gonna get on a consistent way to monitor that and to track that. And so that's something they're working on.
Good.
So
Okay.
yes and yes.
What's that?
I said yes and yes.
Yes
Yes,
and
again, that would be something that we are going to work on, but really the spirit or the intent of that is not changing or moving around numbers. It really is in the spirit of where can we collect information. So like at the middle school level, we have all of those different teachers that funnel into, a child's life.
Right.
So where can we put notes in terms of how things are going, that sometimes there's the tug pull between, what might be just something that we need to check in with the kid on.
Right.
My son has had a few of those,
Right.
versus something that really needs to be
Right.
reported, documented, and we use Infinite Campus for. We don't want to be misleading in either direction.
Right. I was curious, like, if we're tracking data over time, and it looks like we're improving, and all of a sudden we're using a different way of documenting and capturing data, that we kind of benchmark that and start fresh.
Yeah, agreed.
That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of PBIS, whether I like it or not. My wife's a PBIS consultant, and she's currently writing a book about it, so I have to be a supporter of it, I guess. I know more about it than I probably care to. But one of the biggest things that I think that I have heard, whether this aligns with PBIS or not, obviously you use PBIS with Fidelity, the results are there. I'm also just assuming, and this is also based on some of my experiences, is that there's usually, you can almost name count on one hand, two hands, the number of students that make up most of the major behavior referrals. And I don't know if this is a question for you, if it's a larger discussion, but I have a concern that we have students that are constantly disruptive. that are being let back in classrooms, that engage in behavior that, you know, if I was in school, I would have been expelled for. And I sometimes think in our society today, we coddle kids too much. And you know, I guess I embrace more of a tough love approach with my own children and with kids that I've worked with. I know we've hired learning strategists and deans of students and things like that to help with that, but you know, the biggest thing that I hear, and I think a lot of it is coming from the middle school, not as much the high school, is these kids are exposed constantly to fights, and then they see that kid that got in a fight, they're there the next day, or they're this kid that's constantly disruptive in the classroom. And so what are we going to do about those students without adopting a zero tolerance policy? You know, are we ever going to be looking at alternative programs for students that continually struggle with these things? Because as a parent of a daughter, and I'm a protective father going into middle school, I'm nervous. I'm nervous about exposure to that. And sometimes I think what happens is, this is why I like PBIS, is, you know, you have the students that are going there and they're doing the right thing every day, and they're the ones that are getting the consequences. And the consequences are a classroom where it's difficult for them to learn. The consequences are constantly having to wait for those students that are constantly being disruptive to be dealt with. And so I don't know if it's a question as much as it's not, but I would like us to sometime have a larger discussion about where we're going to go with that. Sure. You know, maybe it falls within the tier 3 interventions that we need to improve upon. I completely empathize with the position both of you are in. You probably know that. So it's not even a knock on you. It's just like, how are we going to support that? Because I have not heard one parent say, in the many I've talked to about this, that they believe, well, we just have to keep putting those kids back in the class. That's going to fix it. You know, nobody's feeling that way. And again, I'm not for shipping these kids out, but what are we going to do about it? Because it is a big issue. And I don't think it's just an issue in this district. It's an issue in a lot of districts. And I would really like us to set the standard, I guess, in how we address that.
Well, Tim, I really appreciate your honesty in bringing that forward. You know, sometimes I think, you know, the community may have that question, and unless someone comes forward and asks that, you're not really aware of what we're doing. I think one of the things that I would bring forward, again, we look at data, and we know these things, and I know these things as well. So one of the things that, you know, you as board helped me out was looking at what we call our intensive services position. So we recognize that within our inclusionary practices, that we have some kids that may need something at times that's not in a regular education classroom. So we are implementing some new processes and procedures this year, really related to Tier 3, to make sure that we're helping out not only keeping the general education classroom safe, but also recognizing that sometimes kids, some of our students, in order to be successful, need a very different environment, but they are our students. They are all a part of the Stoughton Area School District. So I welcome the opportunity maybe in the future to talk a little bit more about that.
How should we have that conversation? How should we have that conversation?
You know, I really think it might be helpful to even go all the way back. I guess I've been here long enough to talk about, well, really what is the foundation of this, which is the work that we did years ago with integrated comprehensive services, or known as inclusion, and to take a look and think about, maybe talk a little bit about what that means, because I think Tim, you know, did a great job in highlighting really one of the challenges that we have in schools, and it's not just River Bluff and it's not just the high school, but across other districts, is how are we supporting all of our students, and what does that look like? And what works for one student, you know, may not completely at all work for another student. So I think it's a question of, so what do those environments look like? And as, you know, Tim brought up, there is that, you know, kind of alternative, but within our inclusionary school district, how do we help kids that just may have trauma, may lack skills, may need some special supports in order to be successful? And sometimes that's not every single day, all day long in the general ed environment. But again, we always make those decisions with parents and through the IEP process.
So, and I know there are other questions. I just want to follow up on this a little bit. I think what Tim has put his finger on is an issue that I've heard in the community as well. And how do we, as a board, come to a better understanding of how this is managed? And how do we present that to the community? Is that another presentation here? Is it something else? And I realize you may not have an answer, but I would like to think about it.
I would suggest that we may want to do a learning session with the board and the administrative team, and let's have a conversation. Let's not do a formal presentation
Okay.
type of thing, because then it almost seems one-sided, but let's have a conversation of, you know, a learning session where we talk about that. What do we believe? What direction do we want to take? What are different things that we can use, bringing in Tim's example of, you know, different resources we have, and are there other resources that we don't have that we may want to put into place, et cetera. So I think scheduling a learning type of conversation, a session, where we can get the entire administrative team here, where we have the regular business part of the board meeting, and then we go and have that conversation, I think would be a good conversation to have.
I see heads nodding. Is that something that the board would like? Sure. Yes, you and I talk
Yep.
offline about when to do that and what that looks like, so thank you. John, was your hand up?
It was, I think it was in a way related to the discussion that you guys just proposed, but not necessarily targeting any specific issue. I was curious with regard to Allison's first comment, parent questions or community questions, or on the negative side, complaints. I'm wondering what can we do as a school district and a school board to make sure that first our parents, but also the rest of our community understands the discipline procedures that we have in place, and trust that we actually do have discipline procedures in place, because I also worry that it's any misperception that the schools aren't handling a situation that you guys are in fact handling is a burden that should not be placed on the administrators. And I'm sure that there's something that the school board or at the district level we could do to make sure that our parents know that even if they don't see something right in front of their face, even if they don't see a result or an action in front of their face, that there's something going on behind the scenes. Do you guys have any ideas for what we could do to better educate our community, or do you guys feel like we do a good enough job right now?
Well, I think, you know, it's kind of a, depends who you talk to kind of question, because some people are going to say that was way too harsh, that was not harsh enough. I would also say in the same breath that people, if something, there's a conflict between two students, and they want to know what happened to the other student. They always want to know what happened to the other student, what happened to that student, what happened to that student. That is not their purview of knowledge, because that is not appropriate, and it is confidential. So they don't like that answer when you tell them, I'm sorry, you have to trust it's being dealt with. I can't comment on that student's information. But they want to know, because two people are in conflict. And that probably is a ball of the big wax in which we're talking about, because they want to know, and it's just not appropriate for them to know. It's confidential. It's not their business. It is their business for us to make sure it's safe, to make sure it's fair and consistent, and hopefully they can understand that. But a lot of the time is they want to know what happened to the other student.
So with that,
I would refer them back to me or Trish.
oh yeah, absolutely. I'm just wondering, assuming that there is a certain amount of discontent that's going to exist regardless, as long as there is conflict that exists, do you guys feel like we are doing, do you feel comfortable that we're giving you guys the communication support that you need to sort of proactively approach families? And it seems like you guys proactively approach your students. very well, but do you feel like we give you guys the communication support you need to get in front of families beforehand so we can at least minimize as much of that concern as exists?
I was gonna say, I don't know if you can ever minimize that as much, because it's dependent upon situations, it's dependent upon person. Because if the situations rise, if the person doesn't like it, you're still gonna hear about it.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
And hopefully that over the past 10 years, that, you know, Trish, how many years you've been here, hopefully from our level, that they can see that consistency and fairness and follow through. So, but it's gonna, person you think you don't need to talk to, something happens, it ends up being you need to talk to.
And John, some of it, I think we have to continue to communicate the expectations. We have to continue to communicate what we do. But we also realize when an incident happens, emotions are running high. So sometimes the logic of having a conversation before something happens, of saying, you know, please understand the confidentiality and respecting the confidentiality of the other student, sounds well and good now when there's not an incident, but when emotions are running high, it's harder for us as parents to understand some of this when emotions are running high. So we got to keep communicating that, and understand that when we're in the middle of a situation, emotions sometimes take over, and we just need to keep explaining of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Tim. And when you talk with parents are common sense people. They agree, hey, I don't need to know that business until something happens that involves their student, and then they want to know that business. And sometimes the common sense goes maybe a different direction.
I think maybe the only thing, Joe, I could add to that would just be to, you know, if you get those calls, to have people call and connect in. Because a lot of times the face-to-face conversation really helps us have that dialogue to resolve a concern. You know, Mike and I have done this long enough that in our practice, these things are very different than prior to social media. So sometimes there are things that get started that just, you know, may not quite be true. And so I think it, again, is just the connecting. I always appreciate it when Tim connects people back to myself, and I know Mike does that as well.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, let us know, and we'd like to do a learning session. That's absolutely no problem. Great.
Oh, no,
Joe?
I have something going way back prior to that. I love the Away for the Day. Fantastic. But are you going to be talking to the elementary schools about that? Because kids are bringing devices to elementary school now, so you have a 5th grader who might have not Away for the Day.
Sure.
Now transitioning to 6th grade, and that will be a problem.
I think that'd be a big help with the deans down there to make sure we're being consistent across the system. That's going to be helpful. Attendance, behavior, and PBIS will be the 3 main components of it. Be on the same page.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And if it works really well at the middle school, we just roll it on up to that school.
You know, all good things start at the middle.
Yeah. We'll see how that shakes out.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be any difficulties at all.
No.
Y'all mentioned the Dean of Students, and I had a couple questions about that.
I'll try to answer.
So I think you said something about how there was going to be a monthly meeting among the deans of students and the assistant principals. Was that right? Can you tell us a little bit more about what those monthly meetings are going to be, and who's going to run them, and what they're for?
Well,
Yes.
when Mr. Shin was here, but Mr. Shin is not here, it's going to be co-run by Miss Rhodey and Mr. Shin. Mr. Shin is not here, so probably Miss Rhodey will have to take the reins, since she's the senior AP in the district after 1 year. So she'll start, and if we'll probably give direction. Trish and I will give direction on what topics we need to do, but for the most part, it's going to be focused on making sure those things are consistent. Probably going over just how we're inputting behavior, and then how we're inputting attendance, and what's that look like at, you know, at the elementary level, and what's that look like at the middle level, what's that look like at the high school level. So
I think in recognizing when I was an assistant principal of a much more larger and urban district, the ability to get together with your colleagues and ask some of those very questions that you're bringing forward. What are you seeing? How are you responding to it? We also talked about and recognized that we have a number of administrators and certainly also our dean of students that are new to the district. So to keep everything flowing forward and to answer those questions and really encourage that open dialogue, we are moving into setting up that system for this year.
Last thing we'd want to do is have those positions be isolated to a building that's not focused on K-12, improvement and making sure it's consistent across the thing.
So a question that goes with that for me, and y'all might not be quite the right people to ask this, might be more of a Tim question or a elementary principal question, but how will we know if the deans of students are working from a disciplinary perspective, from a behavioral perspective? Will there be data that will...
And that's something that we've started to have those conversations. We were talking about that at the admin retreat as well, as saying, how will we know that they're making a difference? And some of it, we fully realize we won't know some of it for several years, etc. But what are we monitoring? What are we tracking right from the start? And so that's something that we're working on right now as far as, is it making a difference? How do we know?
I would echo that, Tim. I think we can track some behavior things, attendance things, how we're going consistently with PBIS and how we're doing those things consistently. But I think after 2 years, I think and hope that we will find that how do we survive without them is what I hope is the feeling from across the district. How do we survive without this position before? Because they need to be hopefully a position that's moving and shaking and helping kids through their day. And how did we survive without this position is what the hope is. But I think there's some tracking points with those three things as we go through that.
What disciplinary data do we get, or behavioral data, I've got to start saying that the right way. Do we get, and when do we get it?
We're scheduled to, unless the board wants it earlier, we're scheduled to, principals know on this calendar, every 9 weeks, the building administrators are scheduled to come before the board. After the first 9 weeks, it's our goals, what we're doing, what strategies we're putting in place. At semester time, it's a progress report on those learning targets, it's those learning initiatives. How are we doing? Are we on track? If we're not, what are we doing differently? And the third quarter, we have slated our behavioral data presentation by the 5 levels.
So that would be which month?
February, March.
March-ish.
Okay.
But we've calendared that out that at the end of every quarter, we have a date picked out, or a board meeting picked out for that.
Okay. Are there other questions? Julie?
Well, I want to go back to what Tim and also John were talking. I think that was actually part of the Compassion School plan to do all that, what are we going to do with the students that do not fit into this, type of curriculum or whatever. Also educating the public about the trauma. And so kind of like, what I'm trying to say is that wouldn't these that we're talking about be part of that 5-year strategic plan for the Compassion School, where we also will learn?
Right, so a lot of this fits into the staff development we're doing with this year on trauma and compassionate schools, where we're not only relying on the assistant principals and the deans and the administrators, we're also training our classroom teachers, because they're the first ones that may see it. They're the first ones who can help provide additional resources or contact or get them in touch with it. So that's part of the whole larger picture with the trauma and the compassionate schools. And you talk about positive behavioral support. It's hard to sometimes it's hard to transition and think about it, but our behavioral agreements and our in lieu of agreements are positive behavior supports, because we're giving the students another chance, where there are some districts that I've worked for and some districts that I know that it's basically you do this and you're done. And if we take a student to an expulsion, the way an expulsion hearing works, it's a formal legal procedure where the board is the jury or the judge or whatever analysis you want to make. And you as a board decide if the student is expelled, and you could expel a student up to age 21. Now, if a student is expelled from a public school, no other public school or private school in the state of Wisconsin has to take them, and they probably wouldn't. So you're basically saying the student is not allowed in school until they're 21, or you go somewhere else, find someplace that will take you. And so we know that students developmentally make mistakes. We know that's part of growing up and learning. So how do we take those and how do we help them down the right path? And Tricia and Mike have been doing some great things with students, that giving them second chances and giving them some onus to help straighten out. So for example, if we have a student on behavioral contract or some other thing because of drugs, and part of that in there is random UAs. It's a big motivator and it's a way to say to your peers, I can't, because Big Brother Cruz could tap me on the shoulder any day and ask me if he's suspicious to take a UA. It's part of the agreement my parents and I agreed to stay in school. And with some students, that's a determinant. Some students know it doesn't work and we have to try other things and different levels to work. But it's part of the support, it's part of the, and maybe it's a fault we as educators have, that we don't want to give up on a student. You know, how can we give them one more chance, but it comes to, as Tim brought up, at what point is that chance, or at what point is that behavior affecting the other learning of the students? And let's have a conversation on that as well.
Yeah, in the past 10 years, we haven't expelled anybody from this district since I've been here, and we got a graduation rate of 98%. In a fully inclusive school, our staff is working really, really hard to make that happen. So if that ever point in time happens to come and somebody has to come before you, I want you to completely understand that we've done everything in our power to move that student and help that student get their high school diploma and move forward. Hopefully that time never comes. We've been creative and we've been safe and creative and thoughtful with all the system intact, thinking about it for that student to be successful and other students to be successful there too as well. So hopefully that time never comes, but if it does, I've been over backwards 3 ways to Sunday to make sure it happens, but it just didn't. So hopefully it never happens. So.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming, y'all. We appreciate your
When we
time.
want to do that learning session, that'd be great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks guys.
Next on the agenda, what time is it? It's 8:30. Would board members like a brief 5-minute break before we go forward, or should we power through?
Let's power through.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Well, let's
5
take a
minutes.
brief, let's take a 5-minute break and reconvene, please. So back here about 8:40.
What made you do that, John? That's like sentiment. It's like my mustache. They used to say, "Give it hair." To see where you Yeah, has it been there forever? carnation? Yeah. Okay, so it's chew, finger,
Something before.
You're gonna make a change anytime soon? I got my soul patch. You're retired, you can't change it all. I grab you something big, clean slate. Yeah, you can shave it. Once a week. Can't believe you're wearing clothes. Shouldn't you be wearing pajamas? Doing pretty good. Like 12-mile bike route that I got plotted out, so I've been trying to ride that every day. Exercises.
My team always talking about the case file. What percent of your staff
This one should go
Not
quickly, right?
in the area we're at. Correct, because you have Madison and everything else, it's smaller districts up north, that's a rare. Correct, correct. So, I'm just thinking. Of the building principals, Crystal, District. Like, corrections, and Mel, that way.
I don't know, maybe.
So there's, well, if it helps us consolidate, and so, that's a little bit.
Going forward, using our time.
Especially if there's a podcast, there's nothing when I brought this up. It used to be, so time and I tried to require then the law changed. It's required. It's the law to keep just. Let's use this for chant.
Yeah, I agree. You're paying for the platform.
Not recently.
All right, folks, shall we get back to it?
But otherwise, not really.
Yes.
No, she's
Yes.
going to Washington.
We should get back to it.
In St. Louis.
This is riveting.
So. Thank you, everybody. Next on the agenda is item 4D, which is the Youth Center lease to school district.
Yes, so for a number of years, we have had our transition program at the high school based out of the youth center downtown. The transition program is students aged 18 to 21 that are receiving services based on their IEP. And, well, I got pulled into this, maybe one of those other duties as assigned. But we became aware of the lack of formality around this last January when we learned that the tenant that was actually renting space at the youth center that had been there for a very long time was leaving. That tenant was there during the day, and those folks would allow us into the space to host our program. So as we did some learning around it, we found that there had never really been a formal arrangement with the city. We had primarily worked with this other tenant that allowed us to share the space with them. So as we learned, we did some digging and we wanted to make sure that we were able to continue using the space at the youth center. And in order to do that, we worked with the city to just have an understanding of how they use the facility, how we would use the facility, and how we could continue that partnership. It really is an ideal location for that service. It's right downtown. It allows, and it's within that space, they have a kitchen area, they have different spaces that the kids can use when they're there.
It also provides the opportunity to do some learning in the downtown area, crossing streets, going into businesses, learning how to shop. And then for some of the kids, it's within walking distance of their paid employment. So it really is a great location. And the high school really wanted to continue to be able to utilize the space. So we worked with the city. They provided a sample agreement to us. We worked with our attorneys to kind of modify that agreement a little bit. We will be charged moving forward. The tenant the city used to have to help cover the cost for using that space is no longer there. It's less than what they originally asked for and more than what I originally asked for. So what's being proposed tonight is sort of a compromise. And ideally, we would like that lease to run through mid-August through mid-June and then not during those summer months. It should work well. The youth center is in operation after school primarily for kids in the community. They don't really have other things going on during the day. So this was what we've been working on. It's funny how you start working on something, you start conversations in January and all of a sudden here it is in August. Time slips pretty quickly. But we had a number of conversations back and forth to make sure that what we were proposing would work for both the school district and the city. And I did make some adjustments with our attorney last week and sent it on to the city. I haven't heard back from them, but they are definitely aware of what our timetable would be to have this in place for the start of the school year. So I guess I'll just pause before I talk a little bit about what we would need to do to make it a reality. Answer any questions.
Any questions at this point? Anybody? Carry on.
Use
I'm
to play
sorry.
your questions
Did you
on
have a-
discipline.
Do you have a question?
No.
Okay. So one of the things that's unique about a school district, and I do remember this because we've run into this a couple times in the past, but in order to enter into a lease agreement for a piece of real estate, we actually have to have approval by the electorate. So, and in order to have that approval, you can either do it at the annual meeting, which we do in October, or you can hold a special meeting. We actually did this when we basically gave the Luke Stoughton House property over to the Historical Society. So in order to hold that special meeting, the board needs to approve a resolution to post for that meeting. The resolution, the notice of the meeting will go into the hub this Thursday and then again on next Thursday. If we follow that timeline, we can actually hold that special meeting of the electors prior to the next scheduled board meeting. So we would have that at 6:45. That at that special meeting, we would have them approve two things. Authorize the Board of Education to lease real estate and then to designate that site as a school site. So once we have that special meeting where those two things are approved, then the actual lease agreement can come back to the full board for approval after that sort of legal formality is taken care of.
Other questions about that? No. So at this point, what I would ask for is a motion to, what would we call it? A motion to approve the resolution calling a special meeting of electors.
Yes. And since it's a resolution, I do think, well, it needs to be a roll call vote, but need a motion for saying yes.
I probably would have thought of that, yeah, maybe. Right after he poked me, anyway.
He came to the table.
Yeah. Would anyone care to make that resolution, that motion?
Sure, I'll attempt. I'd like to make a motion for the resolution, is the word, right?
Yeah.
Help me through this, Frank.
So something along the lines of a motion to approve the resolution calling a special meeting of electors.
Okay, to approve the resolution to call a meeting of a special elector meeting. Does that make sense? No?
Yeah. A special meeting of electors
Yeah.
on August 20th.
Oh, I didn't have the date.
I think
On August
if you read this as your motion,
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's,
I
Sure.
think
Wow.
then that's official.
all right.
gotta scroll down.
I make a motion to call a special meeting of the school district electors, the purposes being to authorize the Board of Education. Do I need to read the statute?
Wouldn't hurt.
Okay, pursuant to statute 120.105 of the Wisconsin statutes, to lease real estate and associated facilities in the building located at 567 East Main Street, Stoughton, Wisconsin, and designate such site as a school site pursuant to 120.105 of the Wisconsin statutes. And for the date of this meeting of school district electors to be Monday, August 20th, 2018, with the special meeting commencing at 6:45 p.m. and to be held in the boardroom at the Stoughton Area School District, 320 North Street, Stoughton, Wisconsin. And for the school district clerk to be directed to give notice of said meeting by publication of a Class 2 notice pursuant to Chapter 985 of the Wisconsin statutes, the last insertion of which shall not be more than 8 days nor less than 1 day prior to the date fixed for the special meeting, which is a little different than I phrased it originally.
Meant the same thing, though.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by John, noting that seconding is much easier than reading. This vote will be taken by, is there any discussion? I see no hands. The vote will be taken by roll call, so if you would do that, Becky.
Mr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Bouban,
Yes.
Ms. Sorg,
Yes.
Ms. Huppy,
Yes.
Mr. Coughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Patterson,
Yes.
Ms. Fitzgibbon,
Yes.
President Sullivan.
Yes. The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Next on the agenda is the issue of athletic tournaments as fundraisers. We had discussed this at the last meeting, and we have and it is back this time for a potential vote. So we would need to open the discussion with a motion, if anyone was so interested.
I move approval of the 2018-2019 athletic tournaments and any additional tournament opportunities that arise throughout the course of the year to be treated as a fundraising activity in Fund 21.
Second.
Motion is made, second by Allison. Is there any discussion? I know that there had been a question raised at the last meeting of how much money was actually raised by the tournaments, and Erica had sent an email around. Thank you for doing that, Erica. Is there any discussion? Seeing no hands. At this point, I'll call the question. This is just a straight up and down vote. All in favor of approving the motion to approve the 2018-19 athletic tournaments and any additional tournament opportunities that arise throughout the course of the year to be treated as a fundraising activity in Fund 21. All in favor, please so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. The next item on the agenda is over to you, John.
So we had the first meeting of the ad hoc committee between the Board of Education and the Stoughton City Council the Monday before last, so 2 weeks ago now. And the first meeting since we have sort of shuffled around the membership of that committee. We now have representing the Board of Education, Jill and Kathleen. And on the city side, we also have 3 new members. And I guess the first thing on our agenda, or it wasn't on the agenda, but the board or that committee unanimously voted to request that the city appoint Nicole Weisinger as the co-chair on the city side because they had not yet appointed a co-chair. I think the other two city members were excited to not be co-chair, so that was easy to pass. But for the past year, that committee, the ad hoc committee, has been trying to filter down into a concise mission statement. Hopefully sometime soon we might be able to get a better or a more concise or direct name than ad hoc committee of the BOE and the city council. But we made it out of our committee meeting with a mission statement that we would like, or that we're seeking both school board and city council approval of. So the mission statement that we decided on was make Stoughton a community of choice that attracts and retains young families. And I think that there was consensus in our excitement as a committee that we have the words young families in particular in that mission statement, and especially from the perspective of the school district, because a big part of our stake as a school district in this committee is to try and find some way to address our declining enrollment and keep kids coming into our schools. Personally, I'm really excited that after a year we have a good mission statement and can start to move forward constructively.
John,
But
I'm sorry, can I ask you, in the mission statement, as you read it,
Yeah.
you said attracts and retains? I think, was it maintains when we met that night? I know that's kind of, that's why I wrote down, I copied it from the board, but
I think it was retains, and that is also.
That sounds better.
I'm pretty sure that's what we have, that's what we've posted in our public minutes. And I'm pretty sure that that is also the statement as it will be voted on for the city council. But I was going to now ask, several of this board were there that night, but I was specifically going to ask Jill and Kathleen if you guys had any feedback on the direction of that committee or the mission statement or anything that you think I'm leaving out or would like to add.
Well, yeah, one thing I wanted to say was that I am also glad that young families is built into the mission statement, because it seemed occasionally we were about to derail on why we even had this committee and what the purpose was. And I thought John made a fine point that things were expanding, like, well, we should do this, that, you know, it was getting bigger and bigger. And he said, hey, that's city council, takes care of the city. This is a specific mission to talk about, you know, drawing in young families and then keeping them here. And personally, I appreciated that you were able to kind of keep it going forward. But, you know, sometimes, you know, mission statements and things of that nature, you kind of eye roll. But it's really important, because then when things start to veer off, you can be drawn back to, well, this is why we're here.
I guess on, or as an agenda item for this meeting, that mission statement specifically is up for approval, but does anybody else on the board have questions for, or relating to that committee or that meeting or anything else? I know that it took us a while to at least get all of our committee members sort of on the same page and focused on the scope of this committee, at least as we've been formed and approved of by the school district and the city. So I wouldn't be surprised if anybody else who hasn't been in all of our little ad hoc meetings maybe was confused about where that committee was heading, or if I had not been clear about it in my update so far.
So make Stoughton great again wasn't...
Didn't come up.
I'm sorry.
Didn't come up at all. So.
We deliberately avoided anything with a negative connotation.
Sorry, Mr. President.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to say that I was in that meeting, and I thought, you know, it was a long discussion, and it was sort of meandering at times, but I thought it was really interesting to hear all the perspectives that were raised in the meetings, and given that we had a large number of new people in the group, including me, I thought it was a good job of getting us to the right place. I think this mission statement is exactly what this group needs to be doing. And it's nice to see it expressed so succinctly. So,
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I think that anytime there is a city-level discussion about population, it can ignite some strong opinions. And I was happy, or have been happy all along, that when we narrow our focus down to attracting and retaining young families, I think that's a kind of an undebatable goal for Stoughton as a community. So I'm happy that this committee has narrowed our scope now down to that, because I'm hoping that we can, it'll help us be focused and give us something, some concrete goals to move towards. So,
would you like to make a motion, John?
yeah, I would move to approve the mission statement of the ad hoc committee between the Board of Education and the Stoughton City Council to make Stoughton a community of choice that attracts and retains young families.
Is there a second? Second by Kathleen. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. At this point, we've concluded the business of the meeting for the evening. I do want to inform everyone that we will have regular board meetings on August 20th and September 4th. There's a Finance Committee meeting scheduled for September 17th. Policy Committee will meet September 4th. Facilities is scheduled for October 9th.
The ad hoc committee meeting is scheduled for August 27th.
And where is that? Is that here?
I don't think we decided on a location, so certainly we'll offer it here, but if the city's interested in trading off meeting locations, then we're open to that.
Also, board members, at the last meeting, everyone except Steve received copies of the 2 coherent governance books. I know that you've been sort of slogging your way through them. Sometime in September, we're going to schedule another board retreat to sit down, evaluate the things we discussed at the last board retreat, and start talking about the governance model. So watch your calendars for that. It'll be fun and exciting.
Some
And
very
there'll
good
be
graphics
sandwiches.
in those books.
I'm sorry?
Some very good graphics.
Yeah. Microsoft Publisher.
Notwithstanding some minor concerns about the presentation,
Some good words as well.
there are some ideas that are certainly worth discussing,
Yes.
whether the graphic presentation could be improved upon or not. So if there's nothing else to bring before the board, I would hear a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Motion by Steve, second by Jolie. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and good night.